further incarnation throughout the 14, but when one passes, then only the new one comes.
Tibet is high on the priority list. So let me put it as that way.
The Chinese policy within Tibet will continue regardless of whether we abandon the Chinese or not. The Chinese policy towards our borders will continue whether His Holiness is in India, whether he is in Lhasa or he is in Tibet.
His Holiness has rested his authority to the Gandhian Trust. That is the office of His Holiness, and it's been there for the last 600 years.
That sort of stuff tells you that there is anxiety. When we've seen Xi Jinping visit Tibet, there's been a lot of, it's been in a hush-hush manner to begin with. So that tells you that there are obviously security anxieties that exist within Beijing with regard to Tibet.
It's coercion. It's coercion towards just making you bend your knee. I think they realize that that decoupling that India was talking of some time back.
The Chinese have been learning about India for the last 2000 years. We haven't learned China.
Tibet and the dragon fire. Will it be torn between two Dalai Lamas, between independence over autonomy, between China and India? Hello everyone, I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, our weekly look at events that impact our neighborhood. This week, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama celebrates his 90th birthday on July 6th, it's almost as if he's crossed his own red line, upended the rules that he and his predecessors have lived by for centuries. For the first time in its over 700-year history, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, the 14th Dalai Lama, has openly signaled that his successor will be named. Probably, possibly, while he's still alive even. A successor born in a free Tibet. A successor, the 15th Dalai Lama, who will be picked by his office, the Gaden Phadrong Trust, and not by Beijing. So in one fell swoop, the spiritual leader of over 7 million Tibetans, a global icon of compassion, peace, democracy, and human dignity, has challenged the geopolitical ambitions of one of the world's most powerful nations. He's shed years of moves to appease China and definitely stop China in its tracks. It's a message to China that it cannot influence the process of succession. It's a message to China that its golden urn method of picking one name from several thrown into a bowl will not be honored by the Tibetan people. It's a message also to the 7 million. It's a message also to the 7 million Tibetans who live in Tibet, renamed Xinjiang by China, and the 150,000 number diaspora outside in India and Nepal, that Tibet's identity, its religion, its culture, all at grave risk of being sinicized, will be preserved. He says as much in his wonderful book, Voice for the Voiceless. The big question today, can Tibet preserve its identity? The Tibetan people being victimized inside Tibet with hundreds disappearing, are they capable of fighting back, fighting for their religious freedom, to be arbiters of their own destiny, hold off on outside control? Let's not forget, the Dalai Lama did reach out to Beijing. He was pushing for autonomy within China, the middle way. But then the Nobel Peace Prize winner was named and shamed by China as a splittist, as a traitor, with no right to represent the Tibetan people. China claimed it ended serfdom, brought education and development to Tibet. The Dalai Lama did reach out to Beijing. Back-channel talks apparently were restarted in 2023. It's unclear where they have led. So, is the middle way not China's way? We are honored to have with us today Tenzin Lekshay, the spokesperson of the Central Tibetan Administration. He worked at the Department of Information and International Relations in 2003. He served in DIIR till 2008 in various capacities, most notably as a liaison for the Tibet support groups, and has a connection with the South, I have learned. He's done his master's from Loyola College, Chennai. Welcome, Mr. Tenzin Lekshay.
Thank you, Neena. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Also, our other guests are Ambassador Phunchok Stobdan, senior figure in the Union Territory of Ladakh. He's the founding president of the Ladakh International Center in Leh. He's a former diplomat. He served as India's ambassador to Kyrgyzstan and follows the Asia, Eurasia, Himalayan affairs, particularly India-China boundary issues. He's also the author of The Great Game in the Buddhist Himalayas, India and China's Quest for Strategic Dominance. Welcome, Ambassador Stobdan. Also with us is Manoj Kewalramani, Fellow China Studies and Chairperson of the Indo-Pacific Studies Program at Takshashila Institution, Senior Associate, Freeman Chairman in China Studies with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the US. He was visiting Senior Fellow at ICES, Yusuf Ishaq Institute, and alumnus of the US Department of State's International Visitor Leadership Program at the Quad Chapter. He's an expert on China's politics, foreign policy, approaches to new technology, and he's particularly interested in China's rise. Mr. Kewalramani is author of Smokeless War, China's Quest for Geopolitical Dominance. Welcome, Mr. Manoj Kewalramani.
Thank you so much for having me.
And last but not least, Ambassador Amitabh Mathur. He's co-founder Deep Strat, former Special Secretary R&AW, served for 32 years as a career intelligence official. He's specialized in Pakistan, Afghanistan, the militancy in Jammu and Kashmir, Bangladesh, the United Kingdom, Nepal. With extensive contacts across Asia and Europe, post-retirement, he was appointed as a special advisor on Tibetan and Buddhist affairs by the Prime Minister, where he forged a close relationship with the Tibetan government in exile, as well as His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other religious leaders. Welcome, Ambassador Mathur.
Thank you.
Mr. Lekshay, thank you for finding the time to talk to the Indian Express. You've been quoted as saying the situation inside Tibet is worse than before, that the communist regime since its inception has ignored the aspirations of the Tibetan people, the Uyghurs, the people of Hong Kong, and even their own Chinese citizens. So what has changed? I mean, nothing has changed in China, really. That's been going on for over 70 years. And will the Dalai Lama's recent, reach out to China even help the Tibetan people is something that consumes I'm intrigued by it. But to get back to the question of the recent announcement that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has made, he's indicated that he will not be the last Dalai Lama, as he had hinted earlier, and he has now chosen to hear the views of the Tibetan people. He asked for the Tibetan people's views, I believe, in '69 and again in 2011. Do you think there was a reason why the Dalai Lama would even think of not, reincarnating? Because without him, disbanding that institution would have sent the Tibetan people in would have no binding force, so to speak. Am I right, or have I gone completely off the rails here?
So Neena, first thing you need to understand how important institution of Dalai Lama is for the Tibetan people, right? And as a Buddhist, majority of the Tibetans are Buddhists, and Buddhists all throughout our evolutions, we have been told that His Holiness Dalai Lama is a manifestation of a lot of compassion, but our Lokiteshvara. And our Lokiteshvara is the guardian of Tibetan people, right? Since the evolution, right? So the bond was intact, right? But it is the knot has been solid, right? So over the years, right, though we have lots of difficulties over the years, China has occupied us. His Holiness came into exile, was forced to come into exile, which led more than around 80,000 Tibetans followed him, right? And they all looked at His Holiness as the inspiration, as for the leaders, right? As the sole leader. So for the Tibetans, right, His Holiness is everything, right? For the Tibetans. So therefore, over so many years, Tibetan people has appealed numerously throughout for His Holiness to remain, right? So in 2011 statement, His Holiness says that he will look into, right? Now, in yesterday's statement, it was a good news for us that His Holiness has affirmed that the institution will remain, right? So that now we all are celebrating His Holiness' 90th birthday this year. 2 days from now, but every everywhere in the world, wherever there are Tibetans and the well-wishers and friends of Tibet and His Holiness, they will be celebrating the birthday of His Holiness. Now, one thing we also need to know is, right, many are talking about the next Dalai Lama.
Yes.
But it is very important for us to know that the present, the great 14th Dalai Lama, but his radiance has not just fallen into Tibetans, but all over the world. The love and compassion that he has given, but to all over the world has connected. And throughout, now we as a Tibetan, in earlier days, we said that Dalai Lama belongs to Tibet, Tibetan people. Right? And there were so many books and titles which says that Dalai Lama of Tibet. Now, His Holiness Dalai Lama belongs to the world.
No, that's very interesting.
His Holiness, right? If you look at the 4 commitments that he has, a lifelong commitments, it's all universal for everybody, right? So therefore, I think in yesterday's statement, it is very important to look at where His Holiness said that there were many appeals, not just from Tibetans, but people from Himalayan regions, people from Mongolia, Russian federations, even from the Chinese people from China.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Therefore, with all these requests coming throughout the years, and yesterday His Holiness has affirmed that now the institution of Dalai Lama will continue. Right? So therefore, I think for all the Tibetans, this year we are celebrating the birthday of His Holiness, and that will be a year-long dedicated and in honoring His Holiness for his life and legacy and contribution to the world. And we call it the year of compassion.
Yes, but Lekshay, there was also talk of, I mean, he himself, His Holiness himself, brought up the idea of a democratically elected Dalai Lama. I mean, was that even discussed? I mean, because this is exactly what people want. I agree. They want him reincarnated, and he himself has said that he will probably live till he's 110, and that in that time he will probably groom a successor. Is that a possibility?
I don't think so, because see, Neena, you need to understand the traditions of incarnation, right? So for the incarnation throughout the 14, right, when one passes, then only the new one comes, right?
Yes,
So
yes, of course.
therefore now it's all up to His Holiness, right? Because His Holiness, yes, in yesterday's statement also stated that nobody has authority except His Holiness. This is about His Holiness incarnation, right? So the His Holiness has rested his authority to the Contemporary Trust, that is the office of His Holiness, and it's being there for the last 600 years, right? Dalai Lama's institution has been there for over 600 years. So therefore, I think, right, uh, uh, for His Holiness, right now, as you rightly said, His Holiness promised to live for 113 years. We still have long, right, 20 more years to go, right? Let's not worry about that. First thing, the most important thing is His Holiness has, right, accepted the appeal of all the people,
Yes.
all the well-wishers, that they will be a continuation of the institution of Dalai Lama.
Could you explain, sir, what he also meant by emanation? Because that is something which I was quite intrigued by also. What is that concept? What does it actually mean?
So emanation, see, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there is this one part of the tradition, right, which is not that common actually, which is not that common. It doesn't exist, but it is not that common, right? So emanation is once the living being is alive, right, and he will choose somebody to be his own, right? So this is called as emanation. But for His Holiness, all through the 14, but one passes, then the new one will come, right? So this is different tradition, but a part of a tradition which is not of common.
So it's not something that the Dalai Lama is for, is what I was asking, basically. It's not something that is going to be expected.
So for the 14 till date, the ammunition was not the thing that was discussed and talked about. And as 14 was born, right, and being chosen as a new,
Yes.
right. So therefore, I don't think, see, there is a tradition, right, but this is not a very common traditions.
But it's very interesting that he did this days before he turned 19. And the fact that, it's 66 years since he escaped from Tibet on March 7th, 1959, and found refuge in India in 1959. He's made a very impactful, very meaningful announcement for sure. But now for the biggest challenge, this is something that even though the Indian government has finally come out and has actually supported the idea of reincarnation, there is also you also have to deal with China. Beijing says the next spiritual leader of Tibet must be selected using this method called the golden urn. So its position is that the king emperor Qianlong had codified these procedures, and and for recognizing the Dalai Lama's reincarnation in 1793, I believe. So what are you going to? How are you going to tackle this? Because this is going to, if they do go and do, pick someone and declare him to be the Dalai Lama, as they did with the Pension Lama. The Tibetans will won't they be torn? Won't they be forced to pay lip service to the Chinese pick while venerating their own Dalai Lama reincarnation on the quiet? I mean, will it divide the community?
See, China over the last decade, right, they've been proposing different ideas, right, trying to legitimize their unauthorized, right, authority, right. Three things to understand, right. What China has been saying is the boy has to be born in China. One thing. And second thing is the boy has to be chosen by the use of golden urn. Third thing, the boy has to be authorized by the Chinese regime, right? So three things, when you look at the three things, what China has been saying, the first, His Holiness has repeatedly said that if the Tibetan situation remains unchanged, he'll be born in a free world. Now, when you look at the present Tibet, it is more than ever critical right now, right? Even having a possession of Dalai Lama's photo, someone will go to jail, right? So therefore, I think His Holiness stands with that, right? That Tibet is more than ever critical, and His Holiness will be born somewhere else in a free world, right? So that disqualifies what China says. Now, second thing, when China says that the golden urn should be the only one, right, that's the approach that can determine the reincarnation.
Yeah.
Now, China must know that, as you said, that 1792, Qianlong, right? But we can still say that it was been manufactured by the communist regime. Right? Right? Qianlong, they are saying that, okay, there might be around 29 kind of ordinance or something like that, right? But in the Ambrose record, where is this 29 ordinance, right? There isn't any in the Ambrose record, right? So therefore, they have treated such things, and not only that, it was only in 792 that they said that there should be a usage of golden urn. But before that, there was the Dalai Lama's institution. The Dalai Lama institution has lived longer, has been there even before that, right? So therefore, I think it is not the tradition that has been practiced over the 14th Dalai Lama. The present one was not being chosen by golden urn. The 13th was not being chosen by golden urn. The 5th was not being chosen by golden. 6th, 3rd, if you name it, right? Only one has been chosen because of something.
The 1 out of 14 was chosen by the golden urn.
Yes. So therefore, see, this is not the tradition that we live for, right? So this is a unique Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right? So for that, One thing China need to know is they are out of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. They are not following the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. But they are not the follower of Tibetan Buddhist traditions. So then how can they be able to involve themselves in the religious tradition? Right. Third thing, they said that they are going to authorize, right, the Dalai Lama. Right. They will pick up the Dalai Lama. Right. They will authorize it by law that they have created for their own political convenience. Right. So therefore, I think in all, it disqualifies China, right, in terms of history, in terms of culture, in terms of traditions. Nowhere that China has a role to play in the incarnation of His Holiness. And His Holiness has repeatedly stated that only His Holiness has a sole authority. Right.
Why is atheist China interfering in a religious ritual? That's also a huge question because, and I would like to know what is China's concern with the Dalai Lama choosing his own successor? What is it that they believe? What is it? Why does Tibet's spiritual leadership concern them so much?
One simple reason: political interest. To a simple reason, not in comfort of Buddhist traditions, but only for the need of their political interests. But for the last 70 years of their Chinese occupation, they were not able to win the hearts of the Tibetan people. They have designed many policies, implemented different policies, but they could not win the heart of the people. Right. So therefore, only thing what they thought is if they have the Dalai Lama, they can influence the people. Right. They can change everything. But it cannot. It cannot because it is not within the tradition. Right. It is only for the political reasons that they've been doing that. So it is not true.
But sir, my last two questions to you, if the Dalai Lama, an alternate Dalai Lama, is picked by China, do you see the? I mean, they've done it with the Panchen Lama, and you need a Panchen Lama to endorse the Dalai Lama, and vice versa. No.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Right. Therefore, see, for the Panchen Lama, they have chosen their own Chinese pension, right? How much reference the Tibetan people give to him? Nothing, right? The people
That's very interesting.
The Chinese pension lives in Beijing. And whenever China needs him to go and show the face to the world, he'll be traveling around Tibet, right? And that too, wherever he travels, people were forced to, right, to pay attendance, right? They'll be penalized if they don't. In fact, if you look at Hunga Doji's case, right, a High Lama who passed away recently in Vietnam, one of the reasons why he escaped Tibet was because he couldn't entertain, right, the Chinese pension when he visited his monastery. So therefore, there are lots of things that are happening. China thinks that they can work on just to fulfill their political desire or political interest, but the religion cannot be the tool for fulfilling their political need, right? The only thing what they should do, as His Holiness stated long time back, right, that the situation of Tibet should change for the better of the Tibetan people. The Tibetan people's aspirations to be fulfilled, which China didn't do over the last 70 years. So there's nowhere that even if China appoints somebody, there'll be no respect, not just from Tibetan people, but from everywhere.
But what do you hope to achieve? Because I mean, you don't have independence, you don't have autonomy, you don't have free speech. What is the fate of the Tibetan people going to be? And you're under the military boot because I mean, the Tibet is the headquarters of the People's Liberations Army's Western Theater Command. So how do you see it going forward, sir? What is going to happen?
Neena, do the 14th Dalai Lama, right, lives in the independent Tibet? No, he lives as a stateless. He lives as a refuge, right, refugee.
Refugee, yes.
But still, he's been revered, he's been loved by everybody, right? It is not about the territory, it's not about sovereignty, it's about his legacies, his contribution to the world, right? So that matters a lot, right? So therefore, China, whatever they think, what they can do, but it should be based on truth and it should be based on the traditions which they don't follow. So
Yes.
therefore, they don't have any authorities, right, in recognizing the incarnation of the Dalai Lama in any process. They don't have any legitimate role to play.
Yeah. My last question basically is about India and the US and the world. Is it enough that India is going to send a delegation to attend the Dalai Lama's birthday celebrations? Is it enough that the US is sending one representative? Is that recognition? So, I mean, soft recognition of the Dalai Lama and His Holiness and the Tibetan, government in exile enough, satisfying enough for you as a people?
So,
is there anything more
yeah,
that you would like?
See, the whole Tibet cause is not just about Tibetan people. It is for the larger humanity, right? That includes everybody, including China. So therefore, over the years of our struggle, the struggle is based on truth and struggle is also based on non-violence, simply by the guidance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his leadership, right? So therefore, in this world, it's the rarest of the rare that His Holiness is living among us, guiding us, right, to be the one who helps others, even the adversaries. His Holiness was thinking about helping, right, compassion. So therefore, I think all the world should speak out, right? It is not just simply a recognition or symbolic, but they should act upon and tell China what is truth, right? And it shouldn't be confrontational because His Holiness says that everything has to be right, not just for yourself, but for others, right? But we all live in this world, and the world should be a happier place for the future. So everybody should be a responsible citizen of this world, right? So we are playing our part. The world has to play a part, and even China has to play a part for the better future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lekshay, for taking part in our program. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd love to welcome Manoj Kewalramani and Mr. Amitabh Mathur. What does this actually mean for Tibet? I mean, this is the Tibetans are a peaceful people and they haven't engaged in an uprising since 2009, is it? And what happens, Manoj, to the US's program? They've passed a law. The previous administration, Joe Biden, has passed a law aiming at pressuring Beijing into granting Tibet greater autonomy. And but it's also looks as if that really isn't going to go anywhere, because does this present US government have the same commitment, the same bandwidth to create some kind of sort of undercurrent against the Chinese Communist Party in Tibet?
Hi, Neena. Thank you so much for that question. So you ask if the present US government has a commitment for some sort of binding effort. My answer to that would be depending on which social media platform you're looking at and which day of the week it is, given how President Trump has been acting. But no, I mean, on a serious note, look.
No, but yes, we have to. Didn't the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, pass some kind of a resolution which is slightly more critical of China than before?
Look, I think words are useful, words are good, but words are just words at the end of the day. So we'll wait and see. And also in terms of how the US government has been acting, under President Trump, given the number of fires that they have and given their domestic preoccupations, I'm not sure that Tibet is high on the priority list. So let me put it as that way. In terms of how Washington seems to view Tibet today in terms of the broader dynamic with China, there is an element of, affinity with Tibet, with the Dalai Lama. There's a long-standing relationship, and I think that stands right across the U.S. political community. Yet, what the U.S. would be willing to put at stake is something that I think something that in India we need to also consider seriously. I'm not necessarily certain that there will be a lot that will be put on stake. Already, you've applied sanctions. You've passed certain laws. In terms of whether this will be the hill that you will see the U.S. administration contest Beijing, not necessarily. It will be one point of friction, but not necessarily even high in that sources of friction, because there are several sources of friction between China and the U.S. From that perspective, my view is that there are also many unknowns in some ways, right? Because we're talking about a potential next Dalai Lama. It's interesting in the statement of the 14th Dalai Lama that was issued a day or so ago, he doesn't talk about his successor being born in the free world.
He
That
doesn't.
is, he doesn't mention that. That's mentioned in his book, but it's not mentioned in this statement. So I think
See.
so it's quite a substantive omission in my view. Although he does recognize that the trust has the right to recognize his successor. So I think so there are many unknowns in some ways in terms of how this operates. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that the 14th Dalai Lama has a certain aura, a certain legacy, a certain romance about him. And he's been an excellent diplomat, if I was to say that, in terms of the Tibetan cause, right? He's been able to mobilize the world behind him. Are we certain that the 15th Dalai Lama carries the same gravitas with the Tibetan community and with the world at large? We don't know, right? This person ostensibly does not exist right now. So it's very difficult to think about what the future of the cause will be, how states would react. The one thing that I would say, that I can say with some level of as certain as perhaps I can be, is that you are unlikely to see any of the Western countries jump to recognize a Chinese appointed Dalai Lama. Because we are potentially heading towards two individuals occupying the title of the Dalai Lama. And we're likely to see a contestation for legitimacy among those two individuals between these two entities, the PRC and the Tibetan administration. And I don't think that anywhere in the West you will see legitimacy accorded very easily. And to me, that is also the question from an Indian point of view, the first question of many from an Indian point of view. I mean, there are many questions. I mean, if the Dalai Lama is to pass away on Indian soil, how would you manage that? How would you manage pilgrimages? Then comes the key question of recognition and legitimizing the Chinese claim. So there are all of these sets of questions that lie before.
That's true. That is true. Tell us, the Dalai Lama has specifically said that the Tibetans must not accept a candidate chosen for political ends, particularly by the People's Republic of China. But India, what is this, the dilemma now before India, I think, is because, the Dalai Lama is both a spiritual leader as well as a temporal leader. I mean, he's got a political backing, which is also quite substantial. So how do you think we will sort of navigate that? Will we endorse the reincarnation? Will we come out and openly support the move? Or will we sort of not be as open about it? Because today's statement is also, it isn't as specific as I would have expected it to be.
A statement from?
From the Indian government, which
Sorry,
is basically.
I haven't seen it. Huh?
Yeah, I'll just read it out to you.
Could
Hold on a minute. I'll read it out to you.
Is it a statement by the government or by any individual?
Yes, it is by the government. So India on Thursday backed the traditional process for selecting the next Dalai Lama, a day after the 14th Dalai Lama declared that his reincarnation would be determined solely by established Tibetan Buddhist conventions and his trust and his appointed trust. Reincarnation has to be decided by the established conventions and the desire of the present Dalai Lama. No one else has the right to decide on the next Dalai Lama. It's the most important defining institution for all Tibetans, all those who follow the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism, said Kiran Rijiju, the Union Minister for Minority Affairs. He also has announced that apart from himself, he's going to be accompanied by another government official, Rajiv Ranjan Singh, to attend the Dalai Lama's birthday celebrations. So do you see that as an endorsement?
Well, I think firstly we must be clear whether this is a statement by Kiran Rijiju, who is a Buddhist and a devotee of His Holiness and of the Tibetan monks. I would place more credence if it was issued by the Ministry of External Affairs. Assuming that this has been issued by the government of India through whichever agency, then I would think they've gone much further than I expected them to do. I would, of course, have liked a statement like this to be issued. But my gut feeling is that the government will keep quiet about it for the time being. There is really no need for it to jump into it. There's no need to create, another ruffle with the Chinese on this count, because it's not going to serve any purpose. His Holiness is still alive. Why get into a fight about a situation that doesn't exist? His Holiness is not seeking any endorsement from anybody. But the difference between now and what would be when His Holiness is no more and there is a 15th who has been identified by the Dalai Lama's Garden Photang Trust, would be that the Chinese have already declared that reincarnation of His Holiness or of other living Buddhas is an internal matter. And should somebody or any government interfere in it, it will have a deep impact on bilateral relations. So
that's a message for India? Would that be a message for India?
For everybody. This was, I think, said after the Tibet Resolve Act was passed, in which it was mentioned that in a nutshell, that reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a business of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan religious leaders. Anyone who interferes in this process, whether an entity or an individual, will be sanctioned. And it said that it also questioned the absorption of Tibet into the Chinese state, as it were, and said it's a canard. And they said the government should pledge funds to counter narratives of the Chinese to this account, and also engage with other countries to counter this. So it was in response to this that the Chinese had given that statement. And when they gave that statement, it meant for everybody in the world, not just the US, it meant for us too. So that is one. But you would raise a larger point, and that is, you see, we must recognize that the struggle of the Tibetans is not just of the exiled community, it's the struggle of the Tibetans who are in Tibet. And it is His Holiness and the Central Tibetan administration and their activities which give them some inspiration, some hope, etc. And while they may not have been any upsurge in Tibet since 2008, 2009, but you will recall almost 150, 160 people immolated themselves, seeking the return of His Holiness. Nothing more but just seeking the return of His Holiness. So that is a big issue. The Indian government has played host to Tibetans since 1959. We have helped create.
Why did Jawaharlal Nehru agree, even though he was so close to Zhou Enlai and the Chinese?
Yes, I think Panditji was very far-sighted. He saw the Tibetan struggle as a civilizational one, and therefore, there was no one to question when we extended moral and diplomatic support to its survival. And henceforth, we have huge Tibetan settlements over here. We have monasteries that have been recreated in India. We have Tibetan Buddhist centers for learning. we have the TCVs that Jetson Pema, the Dalai Lama's sister, has established all over the country, which
Oh,
have sustained in Tibetan culture, traditions, customs, language, the whole works. So we have a commitment, a moral commitment to the sustenance of the Tibetan thing. And on that count, I think whether the question that you raised, what would be India's response or something, I think we cannot abandon this 70-year-old policy overnight. Ultimately, people are going to judge you by your act, not by mere words. And if that the other thing is that if the Indian establishment thinks that by throwing the Tibetans under the bus, they're going to buy peace with China, they're seriously mistaken. The Chinese, will continue this repressive policy in Tibet because of its general idea of homogeneity.
yeah.
It is it's a restive part bordering a country with which it has a serious border issue. So the Chinese policy within Tibet will continue regardless of whether we abandon the Chinese or the Chinese policy towards our borders will continue whether His Holiness is in India, whether he is in Lhasa or he is in Timbuktu.
So, if I can come back to the fact that India has this contentious border issue with China, I mean, the Dalai Lama visiting Arunachal Pradesh, Manoj, if you remember, was slammed by the Chinese. They claimed it's part of China, which is completely wrong. Arunachal Chief Minister, of course, now has welcomed the Dalai Lama's announcement. So, what is China's concern? Is it concerned there could be a repeat of the 1959 uprising against the occupation of Tibet, or is it worried about the CIA's operations then, which continued for several years, and or the more recent one?
Yeah, I don't think that the Chinese are particularly concerned about an uprising imminently. There is some anxiety around security threats. You had the Chinese leader who's in charge of their judicial and law enforcement ecosystem, Chen Wenqing, recently traveled to Qinghai, where he again stressed the threat of terrorism, extremism, splitism, and external powers acting to sort of incite some of that. So, that sort of stuff tells you that there is anxiety. When we've seen Xi Jinping visit Tibet, there's been a lot of, it's been in a hush-hush manner to begin with. So that tells you that there are obviously security anxieties that exist within Beijing with regard to Tibet. But I don't think that there is any imminent concern around an uprising. I think that there is anxiety that you might see some sort of an emotional reaction to the passing of the Dalai Lama. You might see something to of that nature.
But in
But my broader sense
2008,
is
but in
what Mr.
2008, Manoj, if I'd like just could a button for a second, is that the uprising was actually handled by Tibetans living in Nepal and living in India. It actually was, sort of they couldn't do a thing about it because it was, they took shelter in and sort of manufactured the whole, uprising from outside China, outside occupied Tibet.
Yeah, but a lot of water has flowed under the bridge since then in terms of Chinese surveillance and security control in that region. And I don't think
Ah,
we should be discounting that. I think I will echo the point that Mr. Mathur made that, look, from Beijing's point of view, this is a policy of homogenization. It's a policy of sinicization of the religion to make sure that there is no external source of control. And I think that is something that is critical to Chinese from their perspective of their national security and sovereignty. That's been this Communist Party's view from very early on. So it's not simply about a religious issue. They see it fundamentally as a political issue. They see it as an issue from a national security, territorial integrity, and sovereignty perspective. And therefore, and from a cultural point of view, they see it as a need to homogenize this community within the broader sort of sinicized worldview. So you're likely to see, therefore, that policy continue in Tibet whatever happens going down the road. But yeah, I think I will agree that there is concern around security challenges with regard to the passing of the Dalai Lama, with regard to the emergence of a new Dalai Lama, and what that could mean internally. Yet I think that the ability to be able to control that has generally significantly improved since 2008. The surveillance capacity is significantly improved. Of course, at the end of the day, it depends on the nature of an uprising. It depends on nature of how many people come to the streets, what it's like. We all assumed that Beijing would easily be able to control any sort of public outcry given its capabilities. But we saw that in 2022 when zero COVID got challenged, and there were protests across streets in China. The
Yes.
party was not able to contain the spread of those protests. It had to eventually surrender and abandon the policy. And its estimation was in that sense correct. This is a frustration with a particular policy. If we shift along with subsequently repress, we'll be able to manage it, and they were able to manage. So it depends on the scale of what the outpouring is. And in Tibet, we'll see what the scale is. But there is anxiety.
But I'd also like to bring in the fact that in 2003, Ambassador Mathur, India went further. It backed China's sovereignty of Tibet. Why did it do that? I mean, is it a military move? Is it a strategic move? I mean, we have a long border. We've had clashes in Ladakh and Galwan, Doklam, Depsang. China is rapidly and massively militarization the border. So we do have a major threat from China. But is that why we went ahead and backed the Chinese sovereignty over Tibet?
I really don't know. I really can't answer this question. You'll have to ask some sinologists. But some people, split hair and say that we recognized Tibet as part of the People's Republic of China. So we haven't conceded that it was always a part of China. It has it's part of China since 1949, of People's Republic of China. But there's neither here nor there. I think it happened during Mr. Vajpayee's trip to Beijing.
That's right.
And I think we were eager to bring relations to a more even keel. I don't know more on this. It is.
No, that's fine. I understand the fact that diplomacy requires us to, say the right things at the right times, without really, seeing the full ramifications of those kind of comments. I mean, it's happened with India, Pakistan also. But does India have a pushback against China? Because I mean, India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar was at the Quad meet. Where the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted the Indians, the Japanese, and the Australian foreign ministers, and they've issued a very strong statement against China's economic coercion, its price manipulation, its disruption of critical mineral key supply chains, and China has also hit out at India. If Manoj would know the intricacies of this, it's delayed the delivery of critical machinery, the magnets that are required to make automobiles, electronic products, and they've pulled Chinese employees out of Foxconn, the Taiwanese giant, both in Tamil Nadu and in Karnataka. So they've affected the production of our iPhones. So where is it going to go? Ambassador Mathur, if you could come in, and then Manoj, if you could come in after that.
I don't know. I guess Manoj would know more, but I think why all these, it's coercion. It's coercion towards just making you bend your knee. I think they realize that that decoupling that India was talking of some time back, the Indians have realized it's not so easy and not so possible. I think we are overeager to improve or God knows what with China. So I think this is typically Chinese bullying. And at the moment, I think the Indian establishment looks helpless. I mean, overeager to please them. Look, I mean, take, for example, this recent problem that we had with Pakistan and the noise that we made about Azerbaijan and about Turkey. Not a word about the Chinese. Not a word about the Chinese, I mean, so it's quite hilarious. I think the narrative of thumping your chest on one in one way and going out of the way to somehow regain favor.
Manoj, do you agree? I mean, these are top Chinese companies which are being affected. Oppo, Vivo, they have production facilities in India. Apple is a target. China is actively stopping companies moving their manufacturing to India. So should India have a counter game in place? I mean, we all say you should dance with the dragon and build. I mean, do you think we should?
So I'll answer that question. I just wanted to go back to your question about 2003.
Yes.
Again, I'm not privy to any of the conversations that took place, but just from the outcomes, if you see, there was a formal recognition from India of Tibet being part of the PRC. At the same
Yes.
time, in 2003 June, same meetings where we set up the special representatives for the boundary dispute, right? So there perhaps was some sort of a give and take in that context to be able to try and move towards resolving the boundary issue. Of course, it's not been resolved since then. On this issue of Chinese economic coercion, look, to me, Beijing is today looking at the world and it believes that it's in a position that it has never been historically in terms of the position of power. It is key to global supply chains. It realizes that economic coercion today, and it's not new. China has used economic coercion, in the past with Norway on salmon,
Absolutely.
Philippines on bananas. So it's not new, this economic coercion. But what Beijing is realizing today is that it's developing a toolkit of systematic economic coercion backed by laws, backed by regulation, and obviously the objective is political. What it's doing with India on different issues is for different reasons, right? So the rare earth magnets is a part of that emerged because of its policy with regard to the United States in response to Trump's tariffs and so on and so forth. The downstream effects of this, of course, were felt by Indian companies and European companies. And since then, it's seen this as a tool that you can leverage governments to come to the negotiating table and talk. It can also use that to sort of punish companies if it wants to. To me, the answer to that rare earth issue, the magnets issue, is somewhere between governments talking, but also in the long term for industry to de-risk. If industry believes that it wants to buy cheaper products and make more profits without caring about resilience of its supply chains, that's the industry's problem. Then don't come back to the government and say that, look, you need to solve this for us. So you understand the geopolitical environment, kindly try to start to de-risk, kindly build resilience, kindly build longer stockpiles. There's a whole range of things that you can do. In terms of China trying to impact adversely India's industrialization process and India's manufacturing sector, I think this is again the development that we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years, where we went from a period where the Chinese wanted to invest in India. India has restricted that investment. In the meantime, Chinese companies in India have felt treated adversely. And you've seen the debate within China turn around and say, hey, look, are we in some way subsidizing our own rivals' industrial sector? And that debate
Oh, that's an
in China
interesting point.
has taken place over the last 5 years. And increasingly, the kind of actions that are taking place tells you that the security hardliners in China, the sort of more protectionist groups, have won out in some senses in that debate. One part of that is a debate within the Chinese economic sort of business ecosystem, because Chinese businesses would like to chase economies of scale, would like to chase cheaper labor, and so on and so forth, particularly as the external environment becomes difficult for China through tariffs and other means in the West. But the Chinese government's view is, hey, look, do we want to transfer all this low-end manufacturing capacity, which may no longer be competitive for many reasons, but also partly because east of China is much more wealthy, labor costs are much
Yeah.
high. So,
Yeah.
so should we transfer it to, should we allow it to be transferred to other countries, or should we seek ways in which we can subsidize its transfer to inland of China? Right, with the sort of interiors of China, which are not well developed. And you can see that debate also playing out within China. So in that sense, it's much more than just economic coercion. But with regard to India, there are elements of economic coercion that we are seeing. And I think we should be prepared for much more of this, because what Beijing is doing is learning from the United States that you need a substantive, clear toolkit to be able to do this, of sanctions for political issues. We are seeing also a former Philippine senator has been sanctioned recently. So it's not just simply a tit for tat game. They're now trying to use this sort of preemptively against countries, against individuals, against companies. And so we should be prepared for much more of this, which all means that governments should indicate to enterprise and industry in India that you need to de-risk on a priority. You need to build resilience. That does not mean you can't trade with China. That does not mean you don't need to have a supply chain linked with China. But that does not mean that but that means that your dependence cannot be so overwhelming that you cripple yourself because the Chinese decided one day to shut the tap.
But to come back to Tibet, Ambassador Mathur, Ambassador Stobdan, I will come to you in a minute. Ambassador Mathur, I just wanted to also come back to Tibet. You know, the 97% of the population within Tibet, occupied Tibet, reveres the Dalai Lama. Is China concerned about losing its grip over the infrastructure? I mean, the fact is that Tibet is the gateway to the Central Asian states. It is the gateway to Pakistan, Afghanistan. There's a GDP of $419 trillion from this connectivity through the Himalayan belt, through its access to, and also Tibet is an economic gold mine. It's got rare earths as well. So is Beijing worried about that aspect of it as well?
I don't think I would tend to agree with Manoj that this aspect doesn't worry them. I don't think there is an organized, or if there will be an organized move within Tibet to threaten the infrastructure or the military infrastructure or things that the Chinese have set in place.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think it's just a thought. It's just a recurring narrative that that comes through when analysts talk about China losing control over Tibet, which is a very, very distinct impossibility.
Yeah,
really.
but related to it is basically the rampant mining, building of dams, the ecological aspect to it, and that is more worrisome.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You've met the Dalai Lama several times, Ambassador Mathur. What is he like as a human being? Is he chat? I heard he's got a great sense of humor, that he has the ability to connect to people. Is that something that you saw when you met him and interacted with him?
Neena, I met him for the first time in 1989. I was posted in Paris, so I was asked to receive him and see him off when he was on his way to Oslo to receive his Nobel Peace Prize.
I see.
I knew about Tibet. I had Tibetans with me in school and in college, but it's strange. And I'm not a particularly deeply religious person, but when I saw him, I don't know what sort of an emotion came over me. I was tongue-tied, and I hadn't read about him. I hadn't psyched myself that I'm meeting an exceptional person, but it happened. And believe me, I may sound very ridiculous, but when he held my hand, I felt as if a current was going through me.
Wow.
I don't know. Many may not share that experience. Many may not have had that experience, but it did happen to me. And then I had the occasion to meet him on a number of occasions when I was heading ARC, and also later on when I was advisor. And some of these meetings involved consulting him on various issues and things. You see, people think His Holiness was raised to be a spiritual leader. They forget he was also raised to be the political leader of. So he's as well versed in statecraft as he is with spiritual matters. So he can be steely resolved. We may not budge 1 inch on certain things, and the considerations may just be practical as to what is good for the Tibetans.
But was he also brought up like a little princeling, sort of, so to speak?
Of course,
because
not just a princeling,
when he escaped in 1959, he must have had a great adjustment process, right? From Potala Palace and a restricted life to having to deal with the day-to-day.
It must have been very traumatic, because he was treated like God. Even his own family had to bow and scrape before him. So and he was always surrounded by attendants and high-ranking lamas. So for him to don some sort of a uniform, disguise himself, and be in the company of Khampa warriors. Of course, the attendants and things travel on foot, sometimes on a yak, sometimes on horseback through inclement weather. It must have had a great experience. Must have been very traumatic for him.
Apparently, he says in his book, This Voice for the Voiceless, that for 9 years he tried to come to some kind of an accommodation with Communist China. And the immediate trigger for his leaving was the uprising in Lhasa on March 10th. Is that what you've also seen? I mean, did he talk about that at all? Does he talk about that time?
No, we never talked about that. No.
But it's an interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I think Mr. Stobdan might have more on that, but no, we didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to actually bring up the topic about, the Tibetan card. Does India have a Tibetan card to play? I mean, there is criticism that we've given refuge to all of these 150,000 Tibetans, and we haven't been treating other refugees as well, such as the Rohingyas. But we haven't actually, I mean, the Rohingyas are the Rohingyas, but is there a possibility that India could play the Tibetan card?
I don't know. Mr. Mathur should be able to tell you more about this because he has dealt with the subject. I was never responsible for any issues on Tibet. I'm not a Tibet expert. But to my understanding, we do have a policy, it seems that, but that policy is about, looking after His Holiness Dalai Lama. Since 1959, he is respected, and there is a program, there is a policy, there are commitments for his welfare, for the welfare of his people. But to say that we have a card, Tibet card, I don't know where is that card. I don't see that card at all, because if it has to be a card, then we must play that card. I have not seen, even lately in the case of Galwan incident with China, there was no talked about Tibet card being used vis-a-vis China or whatever that in the border conflict or whatever conflict that we have with the Chinese. So I think instead we tell the Tibetans to keep quiet. That's not your subject. You've been here for non-political activities. So it's purely religious reasons that we have His Holiness Dalai Lama in India. But if somebody wants to make this as a big card, then we must have a policy, as you rightly said, and that policy must be defined on the basis of India's national interest. Now, is Tibet India's core national interest? I don't know. I know that Kashmir is our core national interest. You and me can die for Kashmir, for the protection of Kashmir. But to say that I will have to die for Tibet, I'll have to think twice. So it is that kind of a policy thinking that we require, and I don't see that. No Indians are going to die for Tibet.
How should we deal with China? Because I mean, you have a very
China is a different issue. The dealing with China,
on the Tibet issue. I mean,
I personally, I do not see China as bad or China is good, as most Indians do that. I think whether China is good or bad is depending on your ability to deal with China. If you cannot deal with China, China can be problematic. If you are able to deal with the Chinese, then we can have some understanding with the Chinese. My understanding is that there are no good sinologists here. We do not understand the Chinese. The Chinese have been learning about India for the last 2,000 years. We haven't learned China. The Americans have tried to learn the Chinese, and they are able to deal with the Chinese. Even Trump administration says, I have struck a deal with China on rare earth. So that means he is able to deal with China. He understands China. So we keep on talking about China, 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 all these things, but my understanding is that we do not have the art of dealing with China. which is not simply a political science or subject of international relations. Understanding China requires far more deeper understanding of their history, culture. Even if you know Sanskrit and Pali language, you will be able to understand China. Unfortunately, I do not speak Sanskrit. I do not know Pali. Chinese psyche is made out of Pali language. So, but
Oh,
how
that's
many
very
Indians
interesting.
speak Pali languages? You know, everything has been transliterated from Pali and Sanskrit into the Chinese language. So even if you know our own language, then you will be able to understand little bit about China. So it's very complicated.
Do you think that India's policy on Tibet, giving refuge to the Dalai Lama, has worked to its advantage or not? Because in the world, we are seen as a country that has given refuge to a very progressive people.
I think we inherited Tibet problem from the British. British were not very clear. British accepted Tibet to be part of China. So I don't think Pandit Nehru could do much, but to go along with the British version of the Tibet policy, British Tibet policy. But if we had our own policy on Tibet, it was problematic because Tibetans have a claim in India, something like 10% of Indian territory. You know, barring Nepal, entire Himalaya has been claimed by Tibetan in 1947, in October, 2 months after our independence. By the time we could do something with Tibet, Tibet was occupied, and we were busy
Yes.
with war with Pakistan. You know, there was a Kashmir problem, there were partition, all these things. We had no time to deal with Tibet. So I think
Yeah.
we landed up with the Tibet issue, and I don't think we had a original thinking on Tibet. Even if there is a geopolitical case for Tibet, Nehru never thought that Tibet has a political case. They thought it's a feudal state, refused to accept liberal ideas, reforms like India, like Indonesia, like Egypt. You know, Dalai Lama is the age of that 1940s and the 50s product. But every leader of the 1950s and the 60s were progressive leader. You know, whether Nasir, whether Nehru, whether Suharto, all these people. But Dalai Lama was stuck in ancient times. He wanted that those, you know, Lamaistic ideas to be continuing. And he was very comfortable with the imperialist Chinese. Dalai Lama is a problem between the imperial Chinese and the communist Chinese. You know, communist Chinese do not accept the feudal system of Tibet, whereas the previous rulers of Tibet, whether it was Kuomintang, whether they were Manchus, whether they were Ming dynasty, whether they were Yuan dynasty, they were all Buddhist kingdoms, Buddhist emperors. And Dalai Lama was very comfortable. They never had any problem with those emperors. It's only
No,
in
that's a very
1915.
interesting.
Yeah, 1915. Say, if tomorrow Communist Party doesn't exist in China or collapses, I think Dalai Lama will be very comfortable with a democratic China, because in a democratic China there is a space for Lamaism, for the Lamas, role for the Lamas to play, like the Taiwanese, like the Hong Kong or Macau or anything. You know, they belong to the past imperialistic Chinese government, Sun Yat-sen, Kuomintang, or whatever that you want to talk. So His Holiness is product of that system. So it's a struggle between the Chinese imperialistic ideas or the capitalist, whatever those ideology, and the communist. It is not
That's
an
a very
issue
interesting
yeah,
take on the
it's
issue.
not a it's not an issue. He is not an issue by between India and China. He has landed up here partly because of the Americans. It is not in 1951. Preparation to bring Dalai Lama outside Tibet was going on since 1951 by the Americans and the CIA. These are all recorded. You know, the US ambassador in Calcutta or in New Delhi was planning all this escape from Lhasa to India. That happened only in 1959 following the revolt in Lhasa. But the preparation was on. The original idea was to take him to Ceylon, to Sri Lanka.
I
Then he
see.
himself wanted to go to Burma. It didn't work out because the UNNU was not comfortable with Dalai Lama having in Burma. And he was also in talks with the Chinese on the border resolution between Burma and the Chinese. So the Burmese couldn't take him. So then he thought he will come to the southern Tibet, which is Tawang. But
Yes, he did
unfortunately,
come to Tawang.
we didn't let him to stay in Tawang. We brought
Mm,
him to Missouri.
yes.
So it's a circumstances. Nehru didn't want him, but then American imposed on us his presence here. So our chapter with Dalai Lama started in 1959. I think our history with Dalai Lama will end with the 14th Dalai Lama. I don't know 15th Dalai Lama, he will mature one day after 40 years or 30 years. But by that time, situation would have changed. You and me may not be even here on the earth. So,
Definitely not.
so
Yeah.
I think it's not a question of Dalai Lama. The issue of Tibet is going now. It's dying. Trump is not taking Tibet seriously. I don't see any editorial in except for last 2 days. Even the Indian media does not write anything on Dalai Lama. Rarely in the 60s and the 70s we had every second day there is an article in the Times of India. Now you hardly see anything. He is not able to visit. So the issue is, it's all right to say that Dalai Lama, whatever it is. If it comes into the diplomatic sphere of activities, then we have to take it very seriously. You have to defend Dalai Lama at every forum, whether it in SARC, whether it in BRICS, whether it in G7, like we defend Kashmir. So are we
Mr.
willing to do that?
Ambassador Stobdan, I've run completely out of time.
Okay,
So I just need, but it's a very, very interesting take on what was being said in the media about the Dalai Lama and the views that we all share. It's completely different from what we've heard so far. Do you have a concluding remark, Manoj Kewalramani and Ambassador Mathur? Short, please. 10
So,
seconds each.
brief remark is that whatever the history may be, we will have to contend with complexities in the future. And I don't think we can escape that however we landed up with this issue. It's an issue that's on our table and we will have to contend with it. I agree. It's not a core concern for India. But it will lead to friction between India and China if we are unable to manage it effectively. What that effective management is far more complicated for 10 seconds.
Very interesting point. Ambassador Mathur.
Yeah, I agree with Manoj. You see, we can brush it aside at the moment, but the way things are going, when the time comes and His Holiness is not around, we will have to confront this issue. Whether we will, ignore it, as Mr. Stobdan would suggest, and let the Tibetans sort of wither away, the struggle wither away, or whether we will not. My hope is, and my advice is, that we should stand by what we have been doing for the last 65 years and continue to support the Tibetan struggle, which is a civilizational struggle.
Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part in the program. So this conclave of 11 monks will home in on a successor after the Dalai Lama's passing. But that could create a huge political vacuum, as you rightly say. Who leads the Tibetan people in that time? This is not turn of the century Tibet. This is a Tibet under the jackboot of an atheist communist China and a Dalai Lama that, if he's not present physically, I mean, will his reincarnated successor even carry the same gravitas and pull is also a good point that you've all made. And given that, as you said, the Trump administration's flip-flop on virtually everything Chinese, we have no idea where it is going to go. Especially because Trump's cut funding now to $22 million in funding to the Tibetan government in exile. So for Trump, obviously trade comes first. And trade gets precedence over human rights. Where that leaves India, which has given shelter to the Tibetan diaspora, is a huge question mark. Will it support and give sanctuary to the reincarnation, the successor, which could be, could be born in a free country? We don't know. But in 2003, Tibet was pronounced as a part of China. But in 2022, I mean, things did change. There were question marks after Galwan and all of that. So I think it's an evolving situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Tenzin and Lekshay, for coming on the show. Thank you, Ambassador Stobdan. Thank you very much, Manoj Kewalramani. And thank you, Ambassador Tony Mathur, for your very insightful comments about the Dalai Lama's personality. Thank you, viewer, for watching Global Express. Please click on the Global Express icon and subscribe to the show on the New Indian Express.